Let me start this off by letting you know that I was living close to a metropolitan area for a little over a year before moving back to my tiny hometown. Before that, I was at college and other places and whatnot. And I didn't interact with anyone from my hometown besides family for many years. I even deactivated Facebook for a few years. Anyway, fast forward to fall 2020, I moved into a house in a tiny town. One chilly fall night, I decided it was the perfect night to chill and get an E created off of my many glasses of wine. I was relaxing on the couch with my girlfriend when suddenly we heard someone knock on the front door. It was around midnight, so she immediately told me not to answer the door. I immediately got up to pull up the blinds on the glass portion of the door to see a meek-looking girl, probably younger than 20, standing in our porch with a blanket and a bag. I was shocked by this, because in a little town like this, there are literally no homeless people. And the town is so small, people usually have a support network when things go sour. I asked her what was going on, and she said she was homeless and needed a place to stay. My drunk self thought it was an amazing time to fulfill my need of helping the world by opening my front door to let her stay in the guest bedroom. My girlfriend immediately sat her down and was asking her questions. And her answers were pretty vague, thinking back. Eventually, she told us she knocked on every door down the street to find a place to stay, because she got into a fight with her mother. So she wasn't homeless. It's also odd to think a young girl would do that, considering the danger. Eventually, I found out that she went to the same private school that I went to from 1st to 6th grade, except the college extension of the same campus. We were kind of bonding on shit talking to campus, because it's this new age bullshit school run by boomers. But then she mentioned that she had a no contact order for sitting at the same table as someone at the school. My drunk self did not register. No contact meant restraining order. So we're talking, and then she says that she recognizes me from Facebook. I was alarmed. Especially because I've never seen this girl before in my life. And we have an almost 10-year age gap. She told me it was because I posted a local rental on the Facebook home share. It was from my mom, who was a realtor without Facebook. Okay, that's reasonable, small town. But then she tells me that she knows my mom. This is alarming because my mom and I have different last names. And she doesn't have social media or any way to connect us. Another thing, my drug self-registered only the next morning. Fast forward to the morning. She says she's going to leave. And I asked her if she wants a ride home because it's cold out. As I drive down the street several miles, I realize she does live on the same street. But she also would have had to have passed at least 5 developments and many rows of houses to get to my house. Was I really the only one to answer the door? Or did she target my house? The next day, my girlfriend and I both discussed how odd that was, and how many things didn't add up. Later in the day, we come back home from the store. And we see the groan in front of our house again. I'm panicking because I'm horrible with confrontation. And my girlfriend said, "You let her into the house, you deal with it." She stays in the car, and I ask the girl what's going on. And she asks us again if she can stay with us. I panicked and asked my girlfriend to come out of the car. My girlfriend told her that she didn't know if she had a gun or who she was. And she could only stay with us if she opened up to us about everything and why she's not going home. We sat her down in the kitchen and nicely grilled her only to get vague answers. To be honest, initially, I was concerned that it was an abuse situation. But it turns out it wasn't. At this point, she's in our house and we don't know how to get around. By a stroke of luck, she says she's leaving to go to the dining hall and will come back later. We quickly tap signs on both the front and back doors that read "Landlord won't allow additional tenants," and continue to say "Best to go back to your mom's." It's later in the evening and dark out at this point, and we hear banging on the front door. Then we hear banging on the side door. Then the back door. Finally it stops. We were upstairs and we knew it was her, so we just waited it out an hour. I walked downstairs to check because we're starving and wanted to use the kitchen downstairs. I decided to take literally one finger and slide one blind shade up from another to peek through the kitchen glass doors. And she's standing there facing me in the fucking pitch black on my back deck. After an hour, I looked her dead in the eye and then turned around and went upstairs. Time passed, and eventually she left. When I opened the door, we noticed she took the handwritten notes as the next day rolls by. Everybody's mom and Kirsten is lecturing and laughing at me about opening the door to a stranger. Which, to be honest, I would never do normally. But the whole thing wasn't sitting well with me, and I needed more information. I posted something on Facebook about it. And a boy I went to elementary with messaged me asking if it was I had quoted her name, because she had an obsession with them that led to a restraining order. He advised me that she's probably harmless and not to respond to why she hasn't come back since. And I still have no clue why she truly showed up, or how she knew me. It cost me the purchase of a Ring security system. But it could have been worse. Fort Bragg, California, is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has kind of a Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean? That misty, almost eerie small harbor town. But it's beautiful and a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the US that travel here. My fiancé and I decided to drive up here after I'd taken some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision. And we packed up our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure I would have lost her. I guess this is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now. And we're staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog rolling during the early hours of the morning and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to get their home for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early, and I was craving eggs and bacon after getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces that we left for our morning adventure. See, here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road. And it looked like the stop we crawled up to was a four-way stop sign. I guessed wrong because when I pulled out and cut off a small Ford Ranger with a dinky trailer attached to it, and two old men driving, I realized a little too late that I cut them off. They threw their hands up and pointed at me. But Lily didn't even notice. I threw my hands up in a sorry, I'm just a dipshit tourist kind of way. And they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would be proud of. I didn't think much of it and kept driving down the 42-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to her about it. I never thought I'd see them again. And I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong though. I was wrong. And I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel when after our not-so-great, but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the future and what we wanted to do in life. But midway through our conversation, she realized that we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to going up to the cute like creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies, kissed her on the cheek and jumped in the Navigator left and got about halfway to the store before I realized that I forgot my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw that same Ford Ranger with a janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I don't remember seeing them here last night. I thought I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder wondering what are the chances these douchebags are staying here, and then not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open, but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light, but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside. But I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never really there at all. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor. Ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer in New York. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or Lily outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Fuck. Where are you guys? I thought before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from. And that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. She was crying, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and his hair was standing straight up until he saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clock is on the phone. And I'm wondering what the fuck has happened in the 2 minutes I was gone. This is what happened told by her. And it makes my blood run cold. It turns out, as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by and those inbred assholes knocked on the door. Lily opened it up thinking it was me forgetting my wallet, which I did. And they tried to force their way into the room saying, "You can thank your boy for what's coming to you," while grabbing her and covering her mouth. But those assholes didn't realize one thing. And that's that we had a dog in our back seat. When I cut them off, Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her. They kicked him and tried to shake him off. But he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off. And Lily was able to sprint to the front office and wait for help, while Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there. I couldn't protect. If we would have found a dog sitter and our plans weren't last minute, she could be gone right now. But my dog was there. And he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that he is truly my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened when she had been kidnapped, beaten, killed, all of the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff. And I told them what happened earlier that morning. And the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't and they got in there with, you could have been filing a different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that. I looked over at Lily and Bruce, and thank God that I rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. Warning: this experience might not be appropriate for some viewers. Discretion is advised as this one is pretty close to the bone. This happened when I was a newlywed. My husband and I went to visit his mother in his rural family home in Kyushu. He said that he was from a small town, but it was smaller than I ever imagined. Another reason we headed back to his hometown was because his father was in the hospital. My sister-in-law was a student, so she wasn't home to help. So that left his mother essentially home alone. And she didn't have a driver's license. So it made getting around the countryside very difficult. She could walk most places, and of course there were buses and taxis. But occasionally you just need a car, don't ya? She needed a bunch of gardening supplies. We arrived in Kyushu on the Shinkansen. My husband would drive his mom around in his father's car. I was planning on going with them, but I suffered with anemia. And I almost collapsed on the train. When my mother-in-law saw me, she said that I looked pale, and she told me it would be better off if I stayed home. I didn't really mind that idea. My husband's room had been left the way it was since he graduated from high school, same bed, same desk, etc. I got into bed and I shut my eyes. Now I should say that I'm a deep sleeper. I experienced and slept through the Great Hanshin earthquake. And I came out unscathed. Also, I have somehow slipped through a 5.0 earthquake too. I had no idea what happened. I just turned on the TV in the evening and saw the news. And I was like, whoa, did that happen? It was truly shocking. So there I was sleeping soundly on my husband's childhood bed for a while. I guess before I began to feel slightly restless, I put it down to being asleep someplace different. You know, like when you miss the comforts of home or you wake up in the middle of the night at a friend's place and you're confused and that initial thought is, where am I? It was a bit like that. I wasn't used to sleeping alone. So when I thought I sensed movement on the bed, I immediately thought that my husband's back earlier than expected. I dreamily thought that he saw me sleeping. And he felt like joining me for a while. After a few moments, I felt like something was off. He was a little more ambitious, shall we say, with what he thought he could get away with at his parents' home. I was more than half awake at that point, and I knew something was wrong. I felt something moving beneath the covers beneath my skirt. I felt a hand try to park my legs and breath of my bare thighs. I opened my eyes 3 off the covers, and I saw that there was an old man on the bed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He saw that I was awake and immediately tried to overpower me. "I want to see what a city bit is." "The looks like that's what this guy said," as he tried to grab at my clothing. At first, I was speechless. I was in stung state. I couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't scream right away. But then my brain kicked into gear. I leaned over to the bedside table, grabbed my phone, and dialed the number for the cops. I kicked at that old man with all my mind, and he went toppling backwards off of the bed. I took my chances. I ran downstairs as fast as I could. I heard the old man cussing me and saying something else disgusting up there. As he got to his feet, I bolted out of the front door, and I ran across the street, where I was immediately spotted by another old guy who was washing his car. I was screaming. It was all horrible. I screamed at the old man for help. And then I just began to cry. The wife of the guy who was washing his car came out and ushered me into their home to take refuge while I waited for the police to arrive. While I was explaining the situation, my husband and mother-in-law returned home. As I was telling the police everything through tear-filled eyes and heavy sobs, the old man, the guy who got into bed with me at my mother-in-law's house, he came out of the house and just sauntered off down the street as if nothing happened. That didn't work out too well for him because he was instantly arrested. Now that my husband and his mother were back, they were able to tell me a few things about the old man. And it turned out he just lived up the street on the opposite side. He was living with his 240-something-year-old sons who didn't work. He didn't work either. Apparently he had a young wife, but she doesn't live with him anymore. Wonder why her turned out he was jealous of my husband and the life he had with me outside of the small town. He told the police that because I was from the city and wearing different clothing, I was, quote, glamorous, and I looked easy to him. He told the police that when he broke in, he had committed no crime. He was simply trying to ascertain if I was a hooker or not. Naturally, he was taken away in a police car. And we were planning on staying the night. But I didn't want to after that. I don't think I was being difficult by wanting to go home. Before leaving, my husband and his mother informed me that the old man was very important. It was a very important person in their town. I didn't care what that man tried to do, would have been irreversible. I was fully prepared to sue this man. But I was asked multiple times to find a more amicable resolution. They kept telling me that they wanted a peaceful end to the matter. I was aghast. It wasn't as simple as that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't get them to see that. In the end, there was no apology, no settlement, and no punishment for the old man. And I cried myself to sleep that night. Is this just something that happens in small towns? God, I hope not. This happened last summer. It was when I was headed back to the countryside to visit my grandparents. Our family usually went to see them in the summer. They lived way out in the middle of nowhere in a place in Japan called Seo in Hyōgo Prefecture. I know it's not great to say this, but I didn't really look forward to summers. Because every time I went to see my grandparents, I would always end up pretty much bored. All my friends were hanging out together. And I was just sat around reading the same books and watching boring daytime TV. I had a ton of time on my hands, but nothing to do with that time. My parents expected me to spend the day studying. That wasn't ever going to happen. On the day this experience took place, I was asked to go to the store to get something. I remember it was a very hot and humid day. Even though it was hot and not that nice to be outside, I decided I'd rather be outside and be inside. I had always been with my parents or grandparents, and I never really went anywhere by myself. I guess that I was old enough to be trusted to go around by myself that summer. So with that in mind, I thought that I would do a little exploring. I found a trail leading into the mountains. That trail was covered by trees, and it looked like it would be pretty cool and shady. I could get out of the heat without having to go home. I hadn't ever really looked around, so I thought this was my chance. The mountain trail seemed way more inviting than daytime TV. The trail wasn't tough, the ground was pretty even, and I was slowly going up towards the mountain. I think that I'd been on the trail for about 10 minutes or so. It was pretty nice. I noticed that there were some houses dotted off to the side of the trail, to the left. I couldn't believe that people lived out here in the mountains. I have to make it clear that this is literally in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing. The houses didn't even look like they had gas or electricity. They were more like shacks or cabins, come to think of it. I went further and further along the trail. I was pretty far into the woods now, and quite high above sea level. I stopped in my tracks when I noticed something up ahead. There was some dirt ahead in the trail that looked a little out of place. I don't know if it's the best way to describe it, but if you've ever played video games on the PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2, you might understand what I'm trying to get at. You know, when the game wants you to notice an object or tile or something, they make it a slightly different shade or lighter so that it stands out. Well, that was what the dirt looked like to me. I stared at that patch of dirt. It was about 2 to 3 steps ahead of me. I thought about ignoring it and carrying on with my walk, but it's something about it seemed so out of place. Notice if the soil had been dug up. I was curious. It really bothered me for some reason, would come to think of it. Maybe I was so interested in it was because I was so bored that day. Let me tell you, I'm very glad I was born that day. You'll understand shortly. I picked up a large stone in both hands and walked over to the out-of-place patch of dirt. I dropped the stone on a patch of dirt. I heard an unnatural sound. It sounded like the stone clouded with wood then dropped. I knew instantly what the sound was. It was a pitfall trap. It was a shock, but I wasn't scared. I just assumed that it was some kids who would learn how to make it to having some fun. But I felt a chill go up my spine when I looked down into the hole. At the bottom of the hole were long, thin sticks of bamboo cut into sharp points. They varied in height, some are long, and some are short. There were a lot of those bamboo spikes down there. The hole was very deep, too. I doubt that it was dug by neighborhood kids. What's chilling about the trap was the fact that there was no bait there. And it didn't look like the purpose of the trap was to catch animals. Perhaps it was meant for humans. I turned on my heels and rushed down there. And I wanted to run, but I was scared that if I didn't look where I was going, then maybe I would step on one of those horrible traps. I got out of the woods safely. And I don't think I've ever been so happy to see my grandma and grandpa's house. I thought that daytime TV was better than being impaled at the bottom of a pitfall trap out in the woods, where no one would come to save me or hear me screaming. I think that's the closest I've come to dare. I don't know what the purpose of the trap was. I was scared to tell my parents when I was that age, as I thought I would get into trouble for sneaking off. I have never been back to those words. Hey, everyone, this is more of an urban legend story than a true story. But they say there's truth in urban legends, don't they? Let me know what you think if this happened to you. I'm a psychiatrist by profession, and I'm often asked about my experience with patients. And when I tell people this experience, they always encourage me to share it with the web. And since this doesn't include a patient as such, I feel as if I can share it. I'm going to keep names, locations, and all personal information out of this. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible too. I don't think I've had a stranger encounter than this one. There was a family of 3 and a couple in their 60s and their son, who was in his 30s, who'd moved into the neighborhood. They actually moved in next door. The son seemed to be a hikikomori. If you're unfamiliar with this term, it basically means socially withdrawn. It's an extreme avoidance of social contact. It seems to be more common in adolescent men. So the son was socially withdrawn and was seldom seen. The word got around the neighborhood and reached my ears that this was the case. I personally didn't even get a chance to meet him. I guess they moved to my area to try and get the son back in the groove, so to speak. I think it didn't work because no one ever saw him. He apparently didn't even leave his room anymore. I know this because I live next door. I could hear the mom yelling at her son to get up and come out of his room. I used to see her around the neighborhood. And she looked as if she was getting more and more tired every time I saw her. About half a year after they moved in, I got a knock at my door. I went and answered it to see the father from next door stood at the doorstep looking glum. He said, "Doctor, I want you to come to my house tomorrow night. I could really use your help." Although I had never done a private medical examination on a potential patient, I accepted. Not only would it improve my home life, his wife shouting at the son was irritating now, and then it would also help him and his family out. And despite the situation, I liked his wife and him. He agreed to come over the following night. So after work, I stopped by my neighbor's house and prepared myself to speak with the son. The mother and father welcomed me at the door and invited me inside. They led me upstairs and the mother said, "Here it is." We were in front of what I guessed was the son's bedroom. The mother started shouting at her stone, "Open the door," and stuff like that. The father then just opened the door. The mother yells at the son again as we go into the room. "How long have you been sleeping? Get up and do something with your day." She throws back the covers on the side I saw nearly made me hit the deck. There was a faceless mannequin lying in the bed, had no clothes on it. The fathers then turned to me and said, "It's my wife I want to talk to you about. She cannot accept the loss of our son."